Where have you been? Hurry up and come back home. All of a sudden, I received a call from my mother-in-law while lying in bed at my own apartment. She must have just realized that all of my stuff was gone from the house. And no wonder, since there had been nobody home until this afternoon. What? But I'm a stranger now. I could only imagine how my mother-in-law looked as she was at a loss for words over my reply. While it's too bad I couldn't see her face, I didn't want to continue the conversation, so I just hung up. She kept calling back several times, but I ignored them all. What a breath of fresh air it was. I had moved into my in-laws' house 3 years ago. After dating Hugo, who was my coworker at the time, for about 2 years, we decided to get married. It didn't take long after our marriage to realize that moving in with his family had been a mistake. Instead of returning to the apartment where I had lived alone, we came back from our honeymoon to the Smith's house. From today, this is your home, Emily. Let's work together and support our family from now on. Hugo stopped the car in front of the house and reached out his hand to me. I took his hand and replied with a smile, I'm looking forward to it. I really believed that everything would work out living with such a kind-hearted Hugo. Since we got home late at night, we agreed to postpone the greetings until the next morning. Driven by the thought that I needed to wake up earlier than anyone else on my first day of living with them, I woke up at 5 a.m. the next morning. When I got out of bed and headed to the kitchen, I found that my mother-in-law, Mrs. Smith, was already there cooking. Good morning, Mrs. Smith. I made it back safely last night. I'm looking forward to living with you. But no response came from my mother-in-law. When I raised my face, Mrs. Smith continued to move her hands without looking at me. I knew she could hear me, but as I was about to say, I heard a disdainful click of her tongue. For a daughter-in-law to be waking up at this hour is outrageous. Isn't it normal to get up before everyone else and start preparing? I've already finished the laundry, and I'm just about to finish making breakfast and lunch. I was left speechless by her sudden outburst of anger. Mrs. Smith, who had always been all smiles and reacted positively to me during the meetups and the moving process, now seemed furiously angry, a perfect description of her in that moment. After that, she completely stopped talking to me, and all I could do, unable to figure out what to do, was to stand frozen in a corner of the kitchen so as not to get in her way. Good morning, huh? What's this? Looks like there's a useless person standing around doing nothing, said Hugo's sister Lily, who had just woken up, pointing at me and smirking. That's right. From tomorrow, you'll be taking over everything, so I'm showing you how it's done now. Standing there silently means you're ready to do it perfectly from tomorrow, right? Fear like I had never felt before washed over me, and every hair on my body stood on end. I realized it was my fault for becoming someone who waited for instructions, but I never expected to be completely left to handle everything the very next day. As I was trying to control my trembling body, Mrs. Smith told Lily, "Go wake up your father and brother." At Lily's glaring look, I finally managed to get moving. I'll go, I said, moving my trembling legs towards the second-floor bedrooms. I knocked on my father-in-law's room first, and a sleepy voice responded from inside. Next, I opened the door to the bedroom where Hugo and I slept to find that Hugo seemed to have already woken up. You're late. There's a lot to do, so make sure you wake me up on time. He grumbled and deliberately bumped into my shoulder as he walked out. Once again, I was struck by fear and trembling. Do I really have to live the rest of my life in fear like this? Where's the Hugo I knew until yesterday? What am I supposed to do? A fear I can't describe had me rooted to the spot. From the next day, my days in hell began. Having quit my job when I got married, I was now in charge of everything concerning the house. Not just the general housework, but also the community association duties and volunteering for litter pickup that my mother-in-law used to handle were all dumped on me. If you dilly-dally, there won't be enough hours in the day. Well, it's clear you weren't brought up properly without a mother, said Mrs. Smith, thumping my back as I wiped the floor. I don't have a mother. She fell ill soon after I was born and passed away. So, I have no memories with my mother, all my childhood memories are just with my father. But Mrs. Smith has no right to speak to me that way. My father raised me well. He taught me everything strictly so that no one could say I lacked anything because I didn't have a mother. I had many sleepless nights filled with frustration. No matter what Mrs. Smith or my sister-in-law Lily said, I just had to grit my teeth and bear it, while Hugo and my father-in-law just watched from a distance. Hugo, who I believed would be on my side for life, quickly sided with Mrs. Smith and the rest. I couldn't discuss this with my father. I didn't want to repay him for raising me on his own with this kind of trouble. While enduring harassment about housework daily, I also had to attend to Hugo. With no time to sleep, my health steadily declined. After 3 years of this life, I finally became pregnant. It was a long, difficult journey. For about a year, I had been harassed not just about the housework but also for not being able to have a child. A woman who can't bear children is worthless to this house and to the world. Every time she said that, my heart was crushed, wishing morning would never come. Part of the reason was that Hugo once said to me, "Mom says so too, if we don't have a kid in the next 6 months, let's get a divorce," presenting me with the filled-out divorce papers. But now, a longed-for little life was sprouting inside me. I thought I would no longer have to hear Mrs. Smith's sarcasm because of it, but her treatment of me didn't change one bit. Instead, she said, "Do you think you can be a good mother like that, without giving me a break even when I was suffering from morning sickness? Lack of sleep, overwork, and morning sickness." I used to look forward to the day I would meet my child, but by then, I had started wishing I could just give up the pregnancy. Even as the morning sickness gradually subsided, frustration with my uncooperative body grew. I had hoped having a child would break the cycle of daily misery, but I realized that was not the case. I thought I had no choice but to run away or give up when suddenly my father passed away. It was so sudden. Apparently, he had been telling his colleagues at work that he wasn't feeling well. Perhaps knowing his time was short, a will was found on the desk in his study. As expected, all the members of Hugo's family, except for Hugo himself, didn't show up at my father's funeral. After the funeral, as I returned to my family home, the doorbell rang as if someone had timed it. It was a friend of my father's who had attended the funeral. This friend turned out to be a lawyer. His business card read Young. And then, Mr. Young handed me my father's will. I was told to open it and see, and when I opened the desk at my father's, which also contained his will, I found a list detailing an inheritance to be passed on to me. The amount was a staggering $3 million. It seems my father held the dual roles of a salaried worker and an investor. All of this was to be inherited by me, and I went through with all the necessary procedures. Next to me, an excited Hugo was thanking Mr. Young, saying, "Thank you so much." After Mr. Young had left, Hugo, with a spring in his step, said, "Well, I'm heading home first," and returned to his in-laws' house. It appears there was also an estimate for the post-death cleanup of my father's belongings, and it was noted that there would be no problem if I contacted the company, so I oversaw the house being emptied. A week after my father passed, when I returned to the in-laws' house for the first time in a long while, the whole family was there at a time when they would usually be absent. "Welcome back. You must be tired. Take it easy, all right? The baby is going to be born soon, so you need to rest." It was the first time in 3 years that I felt the hairs on my body stand on end. It was a chilling feeling, just like before I got married, to see the in-laws' attitude change so drastically. Despite the usual stern faces and glaring eyes, they were now all smiles at me. Seeing Hugo grinning beside Mrs. Smith, I realized what was happening. Surely, Hugo must have told them about the inheritance. That's why they were so obviously turning their attitude around like this. For a week, I was treated like a princess. At the same time, I found it strange that my father-in-law and Hugo stayed home without going to work. "We're going to take a trip from tomorrow. Your father and Hugo have worked hard for so long, but with your inheritance, there's no need to work anymore. Think of it as a well-deserved break. We'll be off, so take care of the house, okay?" One morning, I woke up to noise at the front door and went to check, still rubbing my sleepy eyes, to find Mrs. Smith with her suitcase. She told me, "We really wanted to take you too, but you know, with the baby and all, we should wait until after the baby's born and things have settled down. See you later," and with that, they left with high spirits, and I pumped my fist in secret as I watched their car drive away. I never thought this day would come. The moment I had been longing for had arrived in the most unexpected way. I quickly went back inside, packed my few belongings into a large suitcase and a single cardboard box, and moved straight into Mr. Young's place. In fact, over the past week, I had been carefully planning this escape with Mr. Young. The diary of harassment I had been subjected to, the recordings on my phone I thought might come in handy one day. I was told they would be useful, and I didn't forget to bring them. And I also had the divorce papers that had been thrust at me when I was told, "If we can't have kids, let's get a divorce." Signed by my in-laws, even the witness section was filled out. The submission to the office went through without a hitch. And I felt all my strength drain away the moment it was all over. Later, I moved into an apartment Mr. Young had arranged for me and was taking some time to rest when Mrs. Smith contacted me. "Where did you go? Get back here right now." They must have returned from their trip and noticed that all my belongings were gone. Looking at the clock, I realized that 5 days had passed since I left my in-laws' place. "Time sure flies," I thought, as I responded to Mrs. Smith. "Huh? I'm a stranger to you now." Mrs. Smith seemed to be at a loss for words. "What are you talking about? We're family, aren't we? It's not like we're strangers." It sounded like Hugo was on speaker. And I could faintly hear Lily and my father-in-law's voices agreeing in the background. "That divorce paper you handed me, filled out and all, that meant you wanted a divorce, right? So, I just did what you wanted, got a divorce. I'm sick and tired of being treated like a maid in that house." It was then that I first realized I could stand up for myself so firmly. Rather, I wish I had started doing this much sooner. "Huh? What are you talking about? That was just to say that divorce might be on the cards. I never meant it seriously." I could hear Hugo and the others' voices becoming frantic. "Well, the divorce is done, no helping it now. Let's get on with the property settlement. The inheritance you received, $1.5 million, that's Hugo's, right? When are you gonna transfer it?" "Oh, was Mrs. Smith, my mother-in-law, this unreasonable?" I sat up, perching on the edge of the bed. Inheritance is considered separate property, which means it's not subject to division during a property settlement. So I don't have anything to give you. In fact, it looks like I'm the one who should be getting compensation for harassment and a share of the property. Upon hearing this, the in-law family's outcry was unimaginable. I quit my job, and what about the payment for the trip? How are we gonna handle that? Their complaints were audible. I couldn't help but let a smirk cross my lips. Poor things. You've reaped what you sowed. How much did you spend on this trip? I bet you had more fun than you could ever imagine. Well, you're gonna have to work hard to enjoy life as much as you did on your trip. With that momentum, I hung up the phone and quickly blocked all the in-laws' contacts. The family home where my father lived is already being managed by a realtor, and they don't know the address of this apartment. If I don't agree to meet them, I doubt I'll ever see them again. Later, I was informed by the realtor that they'd been arrested. Apparently, thinking I had fled to the family home, the four of them broke into what they thought was an empty house by shattering a window. But there was nothing inside, just the ringing of the security company's alarm. Ignoring the alarm, they searched the house and, finding nothing, were subdued by the arriving security guards and the police. I was relieved that this happened after I had received the compensation and property settlement. I haven't been informed about what happened to the in-law family afterward. They must be making a living somehow, but I have no way of knowing since I don't have their contact information. A while after the in-laws were caught, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. I named him Max. A name filled with the hope that he would see the truth and live sincerely. I haven't touched my father's inheritance and am living modestly on what I earn from my part-time job. Life might be tough ahead, but for my dear son's sake, I plan to keep looking forward, discerning the truth as I go. A measly $5 condolence money is plenty for a poor single mom, huh? Tossing a coin like flipping a nickel isn't appropriate anywhere, let alone at a funeral home. If someone did that, it would be no surprise if they were considered to have tossed their common decency as a person aside. And there stands such a person right in front of me. To think that it's my former boss just turns my anger into sheer disbelief. He's grinning now, but it didn't take long for his face to turn ashen. My name is Julie, and I'm turning 28 this year. Still unmarried, I live with my mother who raised me single-handedly. Until a few years ago, my brother Kevin also lived with us, but he's currently on an overseas assignment. Though Kevin is also single, he seems to be enjoying his life abroad. Economic reasons forced me to give up on college, so I went straight to work after graduating from a vocational high school. After my father passed away when I was in elementary school, I saw how hard my frail mother worked to raise us, and I wanted to repay her kindness as soon as I could. That's why I worked hard in vocational school, earning several qualifications and managing to get a job in one of the big local companies right after graduation with just a high school diploma. My mother, of course, and even my teachers praised me. Since the company rarely hired anyone without a college or professional degree, it was considered quite an accomplishment for the school. In that company, I worked my tail off to repay the favor of being hired, and I took care of household chores since my mother often fell ill. I wanted Kevin to properly graduate from college, so I put my life on hold and supported him. Thanks to my efforts, Kevin was able to continue his education, and I managed to get my mother to retire from her job. My hard work at the job was recognized, and I was assigned to the sales department. When my boss said, "Office work is fine, but sales suit you better," I was full of anxiety, but it turned out he was right, sales really were my thing. My performance soared, and in no time I surpassed my peers and became the ace of the team. However, the important thing here is not to get cocky about being great. In reality, I've grown with the support of many people, and it's not just my own effort that has gotten me here. While supporting each other every day with my colleagues, the sales manager who had been looking after me for years got transferred to start up a new branch. He was essentially part of the founding team. They asked me to come along, but I turned it down because I live with my mother. The person brought in to fill his shoes was Mr. Nunley, someone the president scouted for his skills. Certainly, Mr. Nunley was good at his job and had a polite and prompt manner, which made him quite popular with our clients. However, he gradually began to stand out in a bad way within the company. Despite this, because he was competent at his job, the boss, who had scouted him, had his reputation on the line, and I believe everyone was really putting up with a lot. I felt the same way, having been made to feel uncomfortable by Mr. Nunley on numerous occasions. When I was new, Mr. Nunley said, "Let's go visit some clients together." Not realizing his true nature at the time, I happily agreed. We made a good impression on the clients, and even secured a new contract right there, which led him to suggest we go out for drinks to celebrate. I had no reason to decline, so we found a nearby bar and toasted. Then Mr. Nunley started pushing me to drink more and more. "Julie, you can really hold your liquor. Of all the girls I've drunk with, you're the strongest." I was shocked when he suddenly started calling me Julie instead of using my last name, and as I was trying to process this, he overlaid his hand on mine. "Man, at this rate, you're gonna be out drinking me. Would you take care of me if I passed out?" His hand felt clammy and disgusting, and it made my skin crawl. Although I had dated a few guys before, I had never felt such revulsion, and without thinking, I pulled my hand away. "What's the matter? Didn't like that?" "No way, you're not saying that, 'cause you agreed to come out for drinks, right?" He looked at me with a creepy smile that made me shiver, and he reached for my hand again. "Or what? You know what would happen if you refused, right? I'm your boss. You get that, don't you?" This time he didn't just place his hand on mine, he gripped it tightly, and I had reached my limit. I shook off his hand. Sorry. I'm not feeling well, I need to leave. This is for my part of the bill. I pulled out a $50 bill from my wallet, slammed it on the table, and quickly left the bar. I knew $50 was too much, but at that moment, I didn't have the luxury to think about it. You'll remember this next week. Mr. Nunley's words hit my back, but without looking back, I frantically ran all the way to the station. Once there, I rushed into the bathroom and scrubbed the place he touched until it was red, and then I started to cry softly. My father would have been close to Mr. Nunley's age if he were still alive. I didn't mind being shown affection, but I just couldn't accept it from someone my father's age. For 23-year-old me, it was quite a shocking event. It was Friday, so I didn't have to see Mr. Nunley until Monday. Honestly, I wasn't in the mood to go to the office. But if I skipped work, I would worry my mom, so I dragged myself to work where an unbelievable amount of paperwork was piled on my desk. You're late. I got your work ready for you. Make sure you do it right. Gone was the kind atmosphere of before. Mr. Nunley was now incredibly cold to me, and everyone looked on in surprise. Since he was only acting this way towards me, it made everyone worry that something might have happened. Though I said it was nothing, inside I was really hurt by Mr. Nunley's harassment. I was given so much work, I wondered when I would finish, and he would repeatedly criticize it without ever explaining what was wrong. Figure it out yourself, he'd say, but then he'd turn around and say my method was wrong. It was all just so bothersome. Everyone was concerned for me, but I was determined not to let it show that I was beaten. By that time, my mom had started to weaken, and Kevin was still in his junior year of college, so quitting my job was not an option. Enduring harassment from Mr. Nunley every day, I turned 26 before I knew it. Kevin had graduated and got a job which immediately took him overseas, so it was just my mom and me living together when it happened. Like usual, Mr. Nunley was scolding me for over an hour when the company phone rang. It was my mom's hospital on the line, saying they'd tried my cell and couldn't reach me, so they called my workplace. They said my mother had collapsed and they wanted me to come to the hospital right away. I thought about explaining the situation to Mr. Nunley and asking to leave early, but he didn't take it well. What are you saying? You hardly get any work done, and now you want to take advantage of the company's policy just because it suits you? Mr. Nunley said with a sneer, his lips curled in disdain. But this was no time for an argument. I was out of time. Fine, just quit your job already. Your performance has been dropping anyway, and there's no benefit for the company to keep someone useless like you around. That's why I hate hiring high school grads. I felt my fingertips go cold and I could hear my heartbeat. That's too much, a part-timer raised her voice in my defense, but Mr. Nunley's tirade didn't stop. There's no such thing as too much. It's always this girl acting all high and mighty. It's been ticking me off. It's better for everyone if he just quits now. Mr. Nunley, grinning as if expecting me to apologize. Normally, I would have quickly apologized, but at that moment, I was too frantic. I couldn't be squabbling over this when my mother was in danger. Got it. I'll bring in my resignation later, but for today, I'm out of here. I hastily gathered my things, ignoring everyone shouting hey, as I bolted from the office and headed to the hospital. Fortunately, my mother was still alive when I arrived, and she had just woken up. However, her condition wasn't good, and I was told that maybe soon it might be her time. Although I'd impulsively spoken of resigning, it might have been the right choice. Messages of concern came from my colleagues and peers at the office, but my mind was made up. I finished the handover in a month and started a new life taking care of my mother. She said she was okay, but watching her unsteady walk, I felt reassured about leaving the company. I had enough savings to live on for a while, and Kevin, saying I can't be there for you, sent a generous amount of money, so there were no problems for just the two of us. Plus, the stress from Mr. Nunley was gone, and for the first time in a while, I slept well. I was enjoying the relaxed times with my mother that I hadn't had for years, but it didn't last. One morning, a year after starting to care for her, my mother wasn't in the living room where she usually watched TV before me. When I rushed to check on her, I found her sleeping with a pale face. The ambulance took her to the hospital, and there I was told that her heart was much weaker now, and she only had a few days left. No response came from her, no matter how much I held her hand or called out to her. She breathed shallowly, occasionally twisting her face in pain. I contacted Kevin to come home immediately, and begged the hospital to let me stay by my mother's side around the clock. In my dreams, my mother was smiling. "You don't have to hold on anymore. Go do what you want," she said as she went off into the distance.
"Wait, don't go!" I'd chase after her, but I could never catch up.
The distance grew, and the moment my mother disappeared into the light, I woke up. In a panic, I checked the monitor attached to my mother's heart, and it seemed to be working, faintly. Relieved, I took a breath, and that's when the door opened and Kevin walked in. Silently, he grasped my mother's hand, and for the first time in days, she opened her eyes. "Welcome back." She squeezed our hands tightly and murmured. The moment Kevin and I exchanged looks, a flatline alarm sounded. My mother must have been waiting for Kevin. And with the last of her strength, she woke up to say goodbye to us. That day, my mother set off to join my father. At my mother's funeral, her friends and my former colleagues came to pay their respects. They all paid tribute to my mother and offered us their condolences. As I was spacing out, taking over for Kevin at the reception, Mr. Nunley appeared.
"Hey there, high school grad. Heard your mom passed away? Looks like you were raised by her alone, so now you're all by yourself, huh?"
As he said this, he took out his wallet.
"Here's a condolence money for you. But for a poor kid from a single-parent family, $5 should be more than enough."
With that, he tossed a $5 note which landed on the floor. The moment it hit, Mr. Nunley burst into laughter. "Did you hear that pathetic sound? Just like you guys. Ah, so pitiful. Such a modest funeral, and the daughter he worked so hard to raise is jobless. That's just too sad." Looking at Mr. Nunley laughing loudly, completely out of place at the funeral home, I just watched him coldly. He wasn't worth any emotion. The funeral home staff looked back and forth between me and Mr. Nunley, clearly flustered but at a loss for what to do. "Are you the boss from my sister's company?" Before I knew it, Kevin was by my side, asking Mr. Nunley in a low voice. When Mr. Nunley, still wiping away tears, said yes, Kevin took out his business card. "I'm this.
We had a special contract with your company, but I'm gonna terminate that deal."
Mr. Nunley took the card and immediately started shaking. And no wonder, the business card bore the name of an IT company that had a direct contract with the president. And above Kevin's name, it read CEO. I was as unaware of this as Mr. Nunley was, and when I looked at Kevin, he had a mischievous smile. "A company with employees like you is not one we can do business with. We don't need this $5 either, so would you please head back right now and report to your president how your screw-up is gonna cost your company millions?" Kevin pressed the $5 coin back into Mr. Nunley's hand and called over the staff to drag him out. Mr. Nunley tried several times to get back in through the automatic doors, but each time he was chased out by security, and eventually, the police took him away. Later on, the president came to my house with a box of sweets. Despite everything, Kevin decided to continue the contract with the president's company but under the condition that Mr. Nunley be fired. True to his word, Mr. Nunley was fired for causing the company losses and is now getting by with day labor. He must be bitterly regretting the value of that $5 coin he threw. I had thought he was scouted by our company, but it turned out the president had just been saddled with a problem child by someone else. When we reported the harassment we had received, the president also mentioned taking legal action. I think now that I should have reported it sooner, but at this age, the hardship of living day to day facing a hefty damages claim is no ordinary matter. In that sense, maybe the timing turned out to be just right. Kevin went back overseas soon after. Initially, he worked at his assignment, but he ended up starting an IT company with someone he became friends with there. He said he waited to tell us until things were on track, which is why it took so long, but it's still pretty amazing. He's planning to bring his friend to the US and move the headquarters here soon, and he's working on getting everything ready. As for me, I've been called by the sales manager who moved to the branch office, and I'm going to work there. Although it means I have to leave my childhood home, Kevin will use it, so it's left as is. Even though there's a bit of a gap since I've been away, I'm working hard to repay the kindness of the sales manager who's been so good to me. It's been a year since my mother died. I wonder if she's met my father. Kevin and we're gonna live on, holding on to the happiness our parents gave us.